What legislation and workplace changes are most likely to impact New Zealand employers in 2026? Today I'm joined by Sanam Permal, one of our favourite guests to have on the show. So she's an employment lawyer and the founder of Law Lenz, to talk through some of the key legal and workplace challenges employers are navigating right now. As 2026 unfolds, many organisations are finding that even small gaps in processes or decision making can quickly turn into much bigger issues. At the same time, employee expectations continue to evolve, which means employers need to be thinking carefully about how they create clear, consistent workplace practices. Drawing on insights from New Zealand's leading employment report, we'll be exploring what employers should be keeping an eye on as workplace expectations continue to shift, where organisations are most likely to get workplace processes wrong, areas where employers may be underprepared beyond just the legislation changes, and some practical steps businesses can take now to reduce risk and set themselves up well for the year ahead. Hello and welcome to Frog Recruitment's 2026 Legislation and Workplace Changes Market Analysis. I am Kirsty Henegan. I am the team leader here over at the Auckland office, and jumping straight into it today, what employment laws shifts should employers be watching out for in 2026? Based on the latest data from our 2026 Employment and Salary Trends report, let's quickly set the scene for you. So we're seeing quite a big change across the employment law landscape at the moment. Some of these changes are already here, while others are still working their way through and are likely to impact employers over the next few years. For employers, it's not just about knowing what's changing, it's about understanding what those changes are going to mean to you on a day-to-day basis, whether that's managing pay, employment agreements, leave, restructures, personal grievances, or workplace planning. There are a few key things worth keeping an eye on. So the proposed replacement of the Holidays Act is still some way off, but it is expected to simplify how leave is calculated and managed. While there's time before implementation, it's a good reminder for employers to make sure their payroll systems and processes are in good shape. We've also seen some important compliance changes that have already come into effect, which include stronger employment access rights to employment agreements, the removal of pay secrecy clauses, and tougher consequences for deliberate non-payment of wages. Looking ahead, minimum wage and KiwiSaver changes will continue to impact employer cost and payroll planning. And there's the Employment Relations Amendment Bill, which could bring challenges across a number of areas, which includes contractor agreements, personal grievances, exit negotiations, and dismissal processes. So to break this down a little bit more for us, we have got Sanam Permal, employment lawyer and founder of the Law Lenz, who is going to join us today. Hey, Sanam. Thank you for coming back on. We love having you on here.
It's always it's always a great time, and I love chatting about this stuff. I have to always admit, though, I love the content. It's always good, and it looks so great. And I hope me talking won't be overshadowed by all the great graphics and everything.
Never. Even if Jacob likes to pretend it will be, it won't.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And it's been, you're right, it's been kind of crazy right now, right? With the amount of law changes that are happening, and I'm sure you guys saw it as well in the salary reporting. Things are shifting. It's very interesting, I feel.
Yes, definitely. And I'm glad that you're here to talk to us about it so that we can all keep up to date. So to start, can you give us the big picture of the employment law updates for New Zealand employers? And before we go into all the details, what are the main legal and workplace issues employers should have on their radar right now?
I could give you a raft of things, and I'd love to sit here and do that. Probably not. I'm not that kind of employment I don't revel in all of it. But I have to admit that there are some key things when we were kind of looking at this session. I was thinking, let's focus on what people actually need to know right now. And the Employment Relations Amendment Act is live and well. It has been, fully implemented in force. And what that means is that you're working through a transition period where your employees that are above 200,000 in their salaries and their base remuneration, and their total remuneration, they are going to be able to basically get their rights taken away from them next year. So in 2027, in February, you're going to see that there's going to be this massive shift in the landscape, and the personal grievance system has kind of changed. It's the biggest shakeup we've seen in 25 years. It's a massive change, which means that at the end of the day, if an employee has contributed towards the personal grievance, or they've, maybe engaged in some sort of serious misconduct or something, their rights are slowly, and their awards that they're able to get are slowly kind of dwindling, and they're disappearing. So we're seeing this, and this is something that the legislation has brought in. It's also brought in things like the gateway test for contractors. We love to use a contractor in New Zealand, and we also like to use them a little bit incorrectly. So this gateway test is supposed to help, but there are some hurdles along the way, which we'll kind of get into later on. And I definitely think, we've touched on the Holidays Act, and you mentioned it as well, Kirsty, but it's so far away. I was looking today, and they're still getting, different education committees and everybody weighing in. So I'm thinking 2028, maybe, 2029, where we're a long way away. But keep in mind that the general elections are happening later this year, which means that everything can turn on its head and the laws can be changed. But the next biggest thing, and this never happens, you never do a session and the day before the laws just completely change. But actually yesterday, the health and safety reforms finally had its third reading and passed through. So at the moment, we're in a transition period as of yesterday. So on the 1st of April 2027, if the health and safety legislation stays as it is with this new legislation that's come out, that means it's going to be fully enforced. So right now, businesses are actually in a transition period. You've heard it here first. It all came out last night. And so there you go. So those are the key things that I think really need to be on your radar as an employer, as somebody in HR, somebody that's touching this every day. But of course, things are always changing and adapting. And I'm sure, like I said, with the general election, things will change. I did unfortunately go on LinkedIn a little bit and have a look at what the commentary was around the health and safety reforms, and nobody was very happy. So really? I do think that might happen next year. Yes, yeah, I do think that might happen.
Yeah. So one of the clearest messages in our 2026 market report, as quoted from yourself, is that processes will make or break employers in 2026. So where are we seeing employers get that process wrong more often?
It's actually interesting because it's not necessarily the process itself, it's actually the systems that you've got in place. So I'll give you an example using the gateway test, for example. So with contractors, you've got contractors that are going to be coming into your workplace, and you want to set them up right. And now with this 5-test approach that you've got to take, 5 criteria approach, you've got to make sure that you give them enough time to go out and seek advice. You've got to make sure that you give them an actual agreement that says independent contractor, or doesn't say employee at least, and really indicates, the kind of work that they're going to engage in. All of those things are critical steps that a lot of employers would miss back in the day because they would rely on the true nature of the relationship test, where you really peel back the layers and you look at, how much control did the business have over the person? How much were they integrated? What was the intention? But now, if you're just looking at that 5-part, criteria test, then at the end of the day, if you miss one of them, you've now missed the entire criteria. And that means that you now have to go back to the old test that was being used, which is creating an extra hurdle for employers. So I would say it's those things. It's creating better systems in your business. If you even look at the personal grievance changes, I know I mentioned a bit earlier that with serious misconduct, for example, you can have a situation where the employee doesn't get any compensation or anything like that, but it will all boil down to what is actually serious misconduct. Have you got it written out in your policies? Is it very clear? I mean, obviously we know fraud, sexual harassment, things like that are a no-go. But when we're talking about serious misconduct, what about things in your business? Is a data breach a really big deal? Is taking customer data? So all of that stuff has to be spelled out. And that's what creates a proper system, a proper process. And that's why it matters this year more than ever before, I think. It's not necessarily getting each step of the process right. Of course, it's always good to do that, caveat as a lawyer. But it is about making sure that you've got the right systems this year too.
Brilliant. And then how about the payroll and compliance, because this is the one area where mistakes can quickly become very serious. So from the 1st of
Yes.
April 2026, the adult minimum wage moved from $23.95 per hour. The starting out and training wage moves to $19.16, and Kiwi minimum contributes lifted to 3.5%. Yay. With wage theft now criminalised, what should employers be checking across payroll contracts and record keeping?
Look, it'll be easy for me to go in and say, audit all your entire payroll. Everybody hates auditing their payroll. You also don't want to pay to do that, I understand. But if you want to chip away at it slowly right now, I would say you really need to understand what systems you've got in place. I'm going to go back to this. I'm going to be the systems person today, just harping about that. But it is really important to have a look at where your salaried workers are sitting, for example, in the payroll system. So if the minimum wage has gone up, it's very common. What wage claims was one of the biggest things that I did time and time again when I represented employees, because you would see employers that would have them on a salary, maybe they were earning, X amount of dollars for 40 hours per week, and suddenly they were creeping up and doing 50 and 60. And then, it was well and truly beyond what was considered reasonable. Now, if you have an employee that's sitting on the minimum wage, technically under a salary, if you really break it all down hour by hour, then all of a sudden, if you're starting to extend those hours out, they're starting to dip and they're going below the minimum wage. And that's when you're going to get caught out. And I love Reddit. I love Reddit to go and read all of the New Zealand, things that people are raising and all of the issues that they mention around, their employers and employment. And in it, there's so many of the threads that you can see. And in Reddit, you always see things like, I've been working at my, employer's business for 2 years. I've spoken to them about, spoken to my boss about the fact that I'm actually working an extra 10 hours every week, 20 hours every week. I've emailed them multiple times. No one's responding. Can I raise a PG? And everybody floods into the comments going, you should go for it. Here's Citizens Advice Bureau. Here's all the ways you can do that. And so people are very quick to doing it and they have all the information to hand. So that's why it's important to make sure that when you're getting these issues cropping up in your business, you're tackling them. And more importantly, if you're having these salaried workers sitting at that kind of line, that you're looking at that and actually bothering to go in and see where they're actually working, what their patterns are. It's not always going to be clear cut in the payroll system. It's going to be about making sure that you're speaking to managers, speaking to team leads, figuring out what's actually happening with that employee. And that's one of the areas. And the other one I would say is wages protection legislation. A lot of times, if you're in a larger business, a medium-sized business, I've noticed that payroll and HR will have a slight disconnect. And it's not because, they hate each other. It's just because that there's usually a lot of people in between where information might not get passed across and things like that. And you have very specific rules around how you can deduct wages. You have very specific rules around what you need to do. And in most cases, you need to consult with the employee, get some sort of agreement to be able to actually do that deduction. Now, a lot of times what happens is payroll will see something like, ooh, this person's used a lot of annual leave. We need to claw that back. Or there's been a miscalculation happening here. We need to quickly claw that back. But without the HR steps involved around consulting with the employee, getting confirmation in writing, you're now in hot water. So that's why it's always important to make sure that you've got the clear lines of communication and you're looking at areas like that. So those are two areas that I don't think people talk about too much in terms of the deductions, but I love talking about it because I can see it happen time and time again. It always happens, notice period, somebody doesn't work it out, and all of a sudden everybody's going, let's claw back that week. It doesn't work that way. So it's best now, regardless of whether the Holidays Act is changing or not at the moment, the wage theft legislation has come in. So that means now you need to make sure that you're not intentionally taking money from employees. You're making sure that there's no reasonable excuses that you could have provided. If you can provide those reasonable excuses, great. And if you can't, then that's a red flag, major red flag, and you've got to make sure that you're fixing those mistakes in payroll. So audit them, start off small, can't eat an elephant in a day, little by little.
Yes, very good tips there, and great kind of like practical steps for people to start being able to look into it. With I know you mentioned earlier around like the personal grievance changes as well. So with the changes, they seem significant, especially around remedies. The recent change to the 200k earnings threshold for unjustified dismissal claims. Do these changes actually reduce employers' risk, or just change where that risk appears? And what assumptions should employers avoid?
So you're absolutely right. It is a great thing to flag, and it's something that I've this week has been heavily about the Employment Relations Amendment Act in my podcast. So that's all I've been talking about. And this was the episode that I actually put out yesterday, and it was around this whole idea around the $200,000 threshold and how that's going to impact, and the fact that employers think that this is a get out of jail free card, but all we have to do is look across the ditch to Australia and see what's kind of happened there, and they've had this type of the dismissal threshold for years. And actually, just yesterday, it's gone up to 190k for them. And with that threshold, what we realized is that the risk didn't actually completely disappear, it shifted. And employees, of course, in this case, they're not able to bring, like for new employees, new agreements, they're not able to bring a claim for unjustified dismissal or anything disadvantage related to that dismissal. But that doesn't mean that all the rights are off the table. They can still do a discrimination claim. They can still do a breach of contract claim. And I would say that the biggest trap that I see there is that you need to make sure a lawyer has reviewed your agreements. Now, that's not going to be me, but there will be a lawyer out there that you can speak to, and your employment lawyer needs to be able to help you to do that. Why? Because you think that it might be simple and you're just putting a clause in the contract, really easy, that says, look, you're earning above the 200,000 as total remuneration. So therefore, you won't be able to access these particular rights around the, unjustified dismissal and disadvantage. But what does the other clauses in your contract say? Many, many contracts say things like you need to act in good faith. But with this new piece of legislation and the new clauses that are supposed to be put into contracts, you actually don't have good faith obligations that are required when you're terminating now. So that means you now have a contradictory clause in your contract. So which one do you follow? And that's when it becomes a breach of contract. Or maybe you're running a redundancy process thinking you can kind of sneak it through that way. But when you look at a redundancy process, then the question will be, well, does your contract have anything about you need to consult with your employees and do all of that? Because now, again, it's a contradiction to what the other clause says around the 200k threshold. So that's when it gets a little bit tricky for employers. And I think the best thing to do is to take that contract, set it up right. I mentioned it in the podcast, do it once, and then you can reapply it. You can templatize it and reapply it to the next person, but it's best for you to at least get it down pat once. And I would say that when it comes to looking at things like discrimination and harassment, it's, even though the new legislation doesn't require you to consult and to break everything down, have a business reason. Keep it at least in your records, on your books, as to why you're doing it. Because if you look at discrimination, I mentioned it in the episode. I mean, if you've got somebody that's maybe 58 years old, you're looking at running a termination process for them. Maybe at some point they disclosed that they had some sort of mental health concern or something like that. Now all of a sudden you're getting slapped with age discrimination, maybe disability, all of these things. And so you want to avoid all of that, and you want to make sure that you keep it about the performance, the conduct, or whatever it's relating to. And of course, you don't have to spell it all out and get their feedback, but it's best to have something in your books. And I always say reasoning somewhere, some record is always best to whip out when you can, rather than hoping and scrambling in the last minute when you've got that claim. So that's where I would sit with, at least what you need to kind of look out for. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. And then you've got a lot of other things to look at, but it's a good starting point for a lot of employers.
Yeah, definitely. So interesting and so complex, but you are right. Have a lawyer look over it, and then you know that you've covered your bases. Quick question: with the 200k remuneration, would that be like bonuses and commission included, or is it a 200k base plus?
No, so it was initially base, and then they expanded out the definition. So a lot of the misconception is that it's base, but it's everything. So that could be if you have a vehicle allowance, if you have benefits, even employee share schemes and everything like that. And I know a lot of people are sitting probably at that 170, 180k now, looking at all the different things going, oh no, am I going to be captured as part of this? So this is a time when your employees might be approaching you and negotiating with you as well. Of course, you don't need to accept that, but you do need to to enter into at least some sort of constructive conversation and negotiation. And to be honest, if I can just flag it now, there's going to be, if we look at what Australia's, what they've done, is normally employees that are earning that amount, they're savvy, they understand, they've run teams before, so they know their way around the law. So they're going to look for good terms. So it might be that you include that kind of clause in the contract and they push back and they say, look, maybe I want 3 months notice when I'm looking at leaving, or if you can terminate me on the spot, but you need to pay me this amount of money when you do it. So now we're going to start getting into a little bit more of commercial severance kind of conversations, which we weren't used to doing before. So it'll be interesting, place that we're in right now, because I feel
I'm sure you're going to get some very interesting questions coming your way as well through Law Lenz. So with the Holidays Act replacement, it's not expected to be implemented, as you mentioned, until before 2028, but it is still a major workplace change. Is there any key areas that you would recommend employers clean up early so that they aren't scrambling a little bit later on?
Look, I would say at the end of the day, wage theft is still a thing. So go back, have a look at kind of what I said before around your deductions, around your salaried workers, look at kind of where they sit. And at the end of the day, where we're at right now, like I said, we are far off. I remember seeing a couple of months ago that everybody was harping on about the employment leave bill. And I thought, wow, this is really going to get passed. And then I realized, no, it was just another step forward. So right now, submissions are actually closed, but the committee, the Education and Workforce Committee, is actually the one that's sitting there reviewing feedback and looking at everything. And then the House is actually supposed to come back by the 13th of July. So we've got a while as this is kind of kicking through. So I think right now, what's probably most important is for you to just get your payroll right in general. Just work through it step by step, have a look at, your salaried workers, your deductions. From there, go and have a look at any circumstances where you may have overtime or outliers in the workplace. It's always important to start chipping away at it, and it makes life a lot easier. And there are a lot of amazing payroll auditors across New Zealand, so you absolutely have the resources available to you. The only thing I would say is, like I mentioned, the most pressing thing now, probably more than the employment leave bill, is that health and safety legislation. So you've got until April 2027. They're going to be kind of trickling information on how businesses can transition up until then. But like I said, watch the space. We always love to bring in laws and change them as elections come in. And so I wouldn't be surprised if a lot is going to get scrapped next year, depending on who comes into government. Of course, if it's coalition, national, it'll probably stay as is. If it's not, it'll probably change. Sorry to get political, but it's just unfortunately how the employment law space works.
Especially on an election year, definitely. And then if we do look beyond the specific legislation changes, what workplace issues are becoming harder for employers to manage well, and where do you think that employers are a little bit underprepared?
It really is genuinely the things that sit outside of the legislation. And I know it sounds so bizarre because all we see is personal grievance claims. We see all of these things go to the authority and we think this is what it's like. But it genuinely is like a performance management conversation that happens and goes pear-shaped. Or it may be when you're looking at conduct in a hybrid world, it's not necessarily the easiest thing to manage, right? You're dealing with apps and messaging after hours and things like that, where employees are, their work life is bleeding into their personal life. And so there's also mental health that comes in as well. And then you see that we're getting more and more situations where employees are, burning out, or they're bringing up, reasoning for issues when it comes to conduct and things like that. So it is really interesting to see the space, because it does genuinely start from those informal steps, from the first conversations. And there are obviously the new remedy rules that have come out around the personal grievances and things like that, but it's not that whole idea of get out of jail free. It is literally going to be a system where you're going to make sure that you've got the right policies in place and things like that. And that's why I do a bit of employment law unconventionally. I like doing these workshops and these trainings where we don't dissect the law law and get into all of that. We actually look at, what are the conversations that are happening? What can you and can't you say? And those are the things that are important. What are the red flags that crop up where you need to take a step back and go, whoa, okay, now I need to call HR. This is where I need to call HR. So that's where it's really important. So I would say, look, start looking at how you run these processes in your workplace. See how you're actually communicating with your employees. If you're getting a lot of issues with your employees, something's going wrong, and it's completely preventable and fixable, but it's just a matter of getting it right.
Yeah, and sometimes it's better to start these things before there is an issue, to be preventative rather than coming into it afterwards.
Yeah, that's right.
And just to close on this side, so if you were advising an employer who wanted to reduce employment law risk in the next 90 days, what would you tell them to do first, and what are the 3 most practical actions that they should take now?
I would say first thing, get your policies right for the serious misconduct side of things. We see serious misconduct so much in the workplace. And the reason why I'm harping on about it is because today the final segment of the episode is going to come out. And that segment of the episode is going to literally be about serious misconduct and the fact that you need to actually spell it out. There was a situation where an employee, basically somebody in the caregiving industry, they had passed away, and the employee was there on the scene, and the employee got terminated because of that. The employee actually won in that case because the employer expected them to use common sense in certain aspects and respects, and the employee didn't. And that is where you really see the issue, because the way that the court approached it was common sense is not about a rule that has been implemented in the workplace. I know it's crazy, but it is the reality. You need to pinpoint it to a rule. And if the rule and the process was to do it this way and the employee missed a step or didn't follow through, then that's what would be considered as a deliberate breach of a rule. And if on top of that, they kind of broke down the complete trust and confidence in the relationship, it was, untenable, that's that extra layer for the serious misconduct to really say that the termination was warranted. So it is something that we haven't seen tested. We're hearing commentary on it so far. No one's touching it yet, but we have, I haven't read it, to be honest, but we did see a case come out yesterday, and that was on the fact that reinstatement might not be offered if the employee engaged in serious misconduct. So there are cases slowly coming out, but they are taking their time. And I would say that the next thing would be that 5 criteria test for contractors. Make sure your contracts are ironclad. So having things like exclusivity clauses in there are a no-no anymore. So your independent contractor agreements need to be perfect. And I'm talking about meeting all that 5 criteria, giving the contractor, at least 5 business days to look over the contract, go get some advice if they want to, making sure that if you're allowing subcontracting, you're not vetting unnecessarily. It is a requirement. If you actually want to vet, then you need to make sure it's tied in with the work that's required. All of those things are going to be critical. And the last thing I would say is, with the 200K threshold, have a plan. If you have a lot of senior employees that are sitting on that salary, have a plan, because next year you're going to be hiring. And if you're hiring people, then you need to be ready for them to push back on those clauses, and you need to have a backup plan. The last thing you want is to lose a candidate because you're trying to speak to your employment lawyer and trying to negotiate, and now they've got 3 other offers sitting there. I mean, Kirsty, you probably know a lot more about it than I do. So,
Yes. But no, some good tips. Some of them I'm like, noted. We'll have a look at that. Well, thank you so much for jumping on with us today. Before we wrap things up, I know that you are in the process of launching your new Law Lenz program. Did you want to mention anything about that?
Yes, so workshops are available for booking. I make them bespoke. I don't do a stock standard workshop. Like I said, super unconventional. It's meant to be for businesses that are really bold, they're out there, and they want to actually try to work with their employees and their managers and their leaders to basically upskill them so that they can have these conversations, and also make sure that they can flag the issues with HR when it's needed. I find that the biggest issues start at the smallest of places, and it's usually months and months ago. And I was tired of seeing that. So that's why I thought this is the best way for me to do it. So I'm not your stock standard lawyer. Unfortunately, I'm not there to help with all the personal grievances and the claims. I am there to actually train you, teach you, and I do it in a way where it's not boring, because I know employment law is boring. So yeah, definitely check it out if you are interested in it. And yeah, I'd love to go on this journey with you, upskill your managers and your HR teams. It's what I love to do.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Some really great insights there, some very good tips for us to take away. And if anyone does want to reach out to Sanam, I think Jacob will be showing your details below for them to reach out. Thanks again, Sanam.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So just a reminder that all the insights that are shared today are out of our 2026 Employment and Salary Trends Report. There is other information in there. Some of the new legislation has obviously come into effect. But if you would like to have a bit of a deeper dive into our salaries, benefits, workplace trends across your market, you can request your copy today by scanning the QR code, which is on the screen right now, or clicking the link in the comments below. Lastly, whether you're looking to grow your career or build your team with the right talent, Frog Recruitment can help you. As an award-winning agency, we have industry-leading teams across New Zealand with specialist recruiters in every major market. Contact details are on the screen now, or see the links in the comments to reach out to one of our team today. And if you are looking for help in recruitment here in Auckland, please do reach out to myself, Kirsty Henegan, on the details in the comments too. And that's all for today. So thank you so much for joining us. Thanks again to Sanam for jumping on the show. And we will see you next time.